Okay, this is the December 9th meeting of the Climate Policy Commission. I'm calling it to order. First, we have the consent agenda. We have the minutes. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second? Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Thank you all. Unanimous. Oh, I have the wrong agenda up. How did this happen? Oh, here. This is why. I'm looking on the wrong side of my screen. Okay, our next meeting is January 13th. We'll be sending out a message about when things are due. I'll have to think about what the holidays mean for that. Council update, Tonya?
I don't know that there is much of an update other than we are hosting a special, we've called a special meeting for this Friday, and we are hoping to finalize the contract for an incoming city manager with the hope that they would be on in early January. So that's good news in terms of being able to get some of the capacity back in our administrative systems. And but there'll be some transition happening in early part of next year as they get their feet under them. So I don't think that
we got a new member. We got a new member. We got a new member.
Yeah.
New commissioner. New commissioner.
We do.
Right. We will. Oh, yes. And Brian Soul was approved. His appointment was approved last night or Tuesday night. And then I don't think we've met, have we, since the wastewater treatment facility
Yes.
conversation? We have met since then. See what happens to all of the meetings in my head. So I don't think that there's anything else I have at the moment, other than the letter that this commission has put forward to council. I believe it will be on the meeting for December 21st on the consent agenda.
Okay, Ray?
Tanya, does that include, when you said finalize the contract, that includes selection? Hopefully Friday?
Yes.
Because,
yes.
So I was just wondering, it looked like the city administrator has quite a bit of background in conservation and environmental issues, as well as dealing with city level and statewide stuff.
Are you speaking about the candidate that
Yes.
we're putting forward? Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I think yeah. So as long, once we can get through this sort of formal legal process, then it'll be time to start figuring out, giving him some time to get his feet under him and all of that. But I think I'm pleased with our selection.
Okay. Well, while we're speaking of members of the commission, we've already noted that Brian couldn't be here tonight, even though he was appointed. I also heard from Andra, and she has some issues going on, so she will not be here tonight. And we have further down the agenda, moving Tanya to a more normal liaison position, which would then open up another member. So just want to be sure that that was all out there. I think we're going to skip staff update. Are there any other announcements from the other commissioners? Okay, I'm not seeing any. There were a couple of public forum items in the packet. A update from Laurie about the Ashland Climate Collaborative, and also the home energy survey press release. There's the hope that a very wide range of Ashland residents will fill out that survey so we can start developing an idea of what we're really facing as far as transforming our built environment. Okay, so I think we can move right to old business. Yeah, go ahead.
Just a comment, I took the survey yesterday and of course we had help in developing it. So very good. I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of responses we're going to get. I know, so the survey closes in January and then sometime post that we'll be able to look at the results.
Right. Yeah. So this is something that Lori and her collaborators are putting forward. It's not a CPC.
Right. Yeah, I
thing.
understand.
Yeah. Okay. Bob?
Yeah, just, yeah, so it's Bex Walker, also from SOU, has been working with Lori on that. And I know that Lori is looking to be as for the survey results to be as responsive to the CPCs and the CCOCs needs as possible. So we're looking for suggestions on ways to cut the analysis because there's quite a bit that can actually be done with it once we start getting information coming in to try to parse out the different groups. There's ways to do that analysis. I had heard her say, I don't know actual numbers, but that upwards of 200 people have already taken the survey. That's good, and a wider array of people. It was actually advertised more widely this time in Ashland than it was a year and a half ago when the first survey went out. So informal input from Lori, I guess. Inside info.
Yeah. Okay. So the climate-friendly and equitable communities rulemaking letter to council, I put myself on there rather than Gary because I just wanted to give an update of what's been going on to get it in front of council. There was a discussion of it at the commission collaboration group a week or so ago. And there has since been a number of communications about which commissions might also be able to sign on to support it. And as Tanya's already mentioned, there was only a couple of possible council business meetings where this could be considered, and it looks like it's going to end up on the earlier one. Gary, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, to my knowledge, the only commissions that have scheduled review is the CCOC and the Transportation Commission, which will meet Wednesday and Thursday respectively next week.
Okay, so I think we can move on from that. Ray, do you want to update us on the formal planning?
I just had a question for Gary again, looking at the document. So the changes we're asking for basically boil down to page 7, where you've got some cross out and some changes.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so my summary that I gave at the commission coordination meeting was basically that we need to have protected bike lanes that are wide enough so that bicyclists can pass each other without going off into dangerous territory. And I don't think I mentioned that they need to entirely interconnect the city, but I'm not sure that was even in what you were doing, Gary, wasn't it?
Yes, that is the case. And the transportation system plan, when it's updated, will presumably provide for that, as it does actually now. It's just a different quality of bicycle facility that we're really looking for with the change to the climate-friendly rule.
Yeah, Bob?
Yeah, and just to be clear on what this, the impact of this, which is a state rulemaking, my understanding is that this is the rule that would then govern what needs to be in each municipality's transportation system plan as those transportation system plans get updated. It's not something that requires an update, doesn't generate an update, but as a TSP is updated, then it's got to comply with this standard. Is that correct?
The only
in the rule. Let's go ahead.
the only qualification I would make of that is that the particular section that we're commenting on, or the city may comment on, is related to cities within metropolitan areas within the state. So Portland, Corvallis, Salem, Eugene, Bend, Grants Pass, and Ashland, or Medford, I guess is more traditionally referred to.
Great. And the timing for them actually, so the city council will submit this to hopefully to the rulemaking body. And then what's the time frame for them actually considering and finalizing the rule?
My understanding is that the February meeting of the Land Conservation and Development Commission will be the last formal meeting before the draft rule is formulated and published. And at that point, then the state will probably go through a round of public hearings and solicit further input from the state, city governments and public at all. So there'll be more opportunities to comment on this as well as other provisions of the rule. But I think at least on advice from the Land Conservation and Development Commission staff, they suggested that we get our input in before the rule is formalized. So that's the logic here.
Yeah, no, thanks, Gary. I was actually looking at the other side is when it would actually take effect. I'm interested in when it takes likely to take effect, because as you know, our city is also in the process of considering updates to its TSP.
As I recall, the rule will affect the new rule will affect governments who apply for acknowledgement of their transportation system plan and after the summer of 2023. So basically a year out from today, or the date of adoption, it will be essentially a requirement. Most of these transportation system plans take a year plus to develop. So the logic of the state rule is that local governments will have ample time to consider and incorporate the requirements of the new rule through that time period. Certainly if there are local governments near the end of their transportation system plan update, the rule would come too late for them to reflect it in their work. So this gives I think a fairly wide window for local governments to finish up before they are subject to the new rule.
No, but in our case, we would likely be subject to this new rule because we've not started the process yet. So by the time we with a year, and then the acknowledgement, I think you said the acceptance of the plan, which would be the end of the process, not the beginning of the process. It's once the plan is actually finished, then you ask for state acknowledgement of it. Is that correct?
You've got it.
Okay, thanks. Okay, thanks, Gary, and thanks for giving me the time, Rick.
Okay. If there's no further discussion of that, which was useful and we certainly had time for, then we can move on to the formal planning update. Ray.
Okay, just following on that conversation. So we still plan next year to do our TSP update, right? Okay. Just two things here. The first one is we're starting off the year in January with a study session on the water treatment plant. And I guess I'd ask Tanya, listening to past council discussion, I know the new treatment plant's in design, but is there still some debate whether we're going ahead with this at all? Or is that what we're going to go through in the study session?
I think that there may be some of those questions brought forward, but the council has approved us, that design work to carry forward. At this point, we are moving forward to build the new treatment facility. Mm-hmm. If there are significant concerns about that, then the council itself has to revisit it, has to decide to revisit it. And the council as a group has not made that decision yet. But I think a lot has been on the moves in terms of potential funding and cost of materials and all sorts of things, in the last year. Well, by the time that we see them in January, it'll have been about a year. Well, but at least a reasonable amount of time since we told them to go ahead and go forward with the design. So I don't know what we're going to find out at that meeting, but I know a lot of things have been shifting. So I don't know. And as far as I know, we're on the track to build a new water treatment facility.
Yeah. So stay tuned for that meeting if you're interested in that topic. The only other thing I put on here was that our 10-year electrical study is on hold. Again, it was completion of the wildfire safety and as well as staff resource. So we'll have to be looking next year when we might be able to start that again. The one item of note I think I got from Tanya was that Tom Bartlett, who's the director of the electric utility, is been appointed to be on the Oregon Department of Energy work group looking at small scale renewable energy projects. So that'll be good input for our city going forward as we look to pursue projects on our own. And that's all I had for that, Rick.
Okay, thank you, Ray. Let's see.
Rick, can I just, you mind if I take another minute? And
No, we have time. Please go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Rick. I raise this frequently. This is the one I'm always raising about the electric master plan. We all know how important it is. I'm just wondering, is there any? And we're here now. First, it was because of budget season, then it was because of this or that, and then now it's the wildfire risk, and I don't know what that is exactly and when that's going to be done. It sounds like that's going to be a long-term study, and there's staff resource constraints. I remember that Tom Bartlett told us when he came to speak with us over a year ago now, that this was something for which the electric department had resources, and that he thought it could be a fairly short-term effort. I think my recollection was something like 6 months to go through this piece of it, and obviously this then builds on to the subsequent study that is even more critical. It's I don't know. It feels a little frustrating to hear that it just has slid way outside the whole time frame, given that one of the pivotal pieces here in Ashland, which is electrification, will depend on ensuring that our electrical grid and our system is able to accommodate and resilient enough to accommodate it. So I just wonder, is there anything that we can do to try to bump this up the list of priorities? Is there something that the commission can do, or that the community should be able to do? It just feels like we're accepting that this is pushed off without really having much of an explanation or an opportunity to rejigger priorities.
Well, Bob, I think one thing we could ask Tom for is an update on when he thinks this might start, and how is he for his resources for money and staff. Because what he had early last year may not still be there this year, and when is he going to get that?
Okay, that seems like a reasonable thing to do, and I'm happy to send Tom an email just asking for a status update like that.
I would love that if you'd be able to do that, Rick. Tanya, did you also have some light to shed on this? Or
I don't have any light to shed on it, unfortunately, but I'm interested to see what Tom's answer is in terms of when might it be on the schedule, and do we have the resources there. With having a new city manager coming on, I guess I couldn't overstate the strain that has happened at the city because of the short staffing, and while it has been heavily in the administrative department, that has impacts on other departments. And there's vacancies throughout the organizational structure. So I think I'm interested to see what Tom says, but there may be a conversation to be had early in the new year around those sorts of priorities once our city manager gets their feet under them.
Yeah, so it's my intent sometime in January, perhaps early February, to try to connect with the new city manager. There's obviously going to be an awful lot on this plate, but I don't want our work to fall too far down the priority list. Right.
And I would just add that, Tom has been incredibly supportive of the work of this commission. And so, I'm interested in figuring out how can we help move it along, or help, lock it into the calendar so that it stays where it needs to be in terms of our longer term goals.
Yeah, and let me just clarify, I'm not trying to be critical of Tom or his management of the priorities that he's facing in the electric department, but I'm wondering if there are things that we can do to help him to raise it in the priority, to kind of meet with the time frame and priority that he expressed over a year ago.
Right. No, that's what I heard. I don't think that anybody is intending to be critical. Okay. I think we move on to, unless there's any further comments about that, move on to the CPC Council study session process. I put another update of that memo, combined a number of loose ends into it. So it's changed a significant amount from the previous update. Even though the actual memo and presentation preparation questions have only had mild updates based on prior comments from the commission. So let's see. I have mentioned that this memo exists at the commission coordination meeting, and was asked to share it with all the commissions. Now, I have already done that. We will be having another coordination meeting in January. And I expect that this topic, which is how council and commissions interact, as well as how commissions interact with each other, which is not the topic of this memo, will be on the agenda for that meeting. So let's see. I did put in a request to the mayor to update her on where we are in our policy recommendation process. And it's been a few weeks and I haven't heard anything back. So I'll follow up on that again in January if I don't get a response. So with that, are there any comments on the memo? Any changes people would like to see, Bob?
Yeah, thanks, Rick, and I appreciate the work that you've put into this and really clarifying, this. I wonder if this is assuming something that doesn't always need to happen. I mean, it's presented as if there always needs to be a study session before a policy proposal. And I think in many cases, it's useful to have a study session before presenting a policy proposal to the council. But I'm wondering, maybe this is Tanya's best to answer this, or you, Rick, if that's absolutely necessary, or are we building in an extra step that is maybe a discretionary step, subject to a conversation with the council liaison, or the mayor before on strategy for putting proposals before the council. Sometimes perhaps of going straight to a business meeting rather than a study session. Is there a rule that says everything has to go through a study session first?
No, it's a subjective decision that's made typically by the city manager and the mayor in looking at the complexity of issues that are coming in front of the council. So every council agenda has a number of issues that are often time sensitive. And so anything that's going to engender a large conversation or an in-depth conversation, or potentially result in that agenda item being postponed while additional information is gathered, they typically want to get out ahead of that with a study session so that counselors can ask questions. And if there's more information that's needed before council considers a decision, then council can direct staff to do that. So it's really the meaty topics. You know, we'll see presentations on things like the housing analysis, because it's in depth. So I think some of the things that this commission might bring forward, I think, could go directly to a city council meeting. Others, you know, would be strategic to have an in-depth conversation with council and to get a read on how people are thinking about it and whether they have concerns, that sort of thing. Just depends on which item it is.
That's helpful.
So,
I didn't want to prejudge that everything would have to, I didn't want to, in any sense, prejudge that everything would have to go to a study session first. So that's helpful guidance. Thanks, Tony.
right. So I would prefer not to continue to complicate this, because it can, there's all kinds of paths that things can take. And trying to capture all of that, I think will make what we're trying to do overly complicated and put people off. I was trying to keep it simple. So if the commission wants it to be updated to include that eventuality, I can do that. I'd rather not. Ray? I can't hear you, Ray.
One of the things is we've got 4 topics listed there. Do we feel that each of those needs a study session?
There's no doubt in my mind
Okay.
that each of them needs that. And that was one reason why it was laid out the way it is, because I was mostly focused on the 4 that we're currently bringing forward.
I think, you know, we go ahead with that and we see how it goes and we adapt as needed.
Okay, I'm fine with that. Did you want to formally propose a change, Bob?
No, I understand this is, well, my understanding of this is mostly for us to guide how we are thinking about going forward to present things to the council. And with that conversation, I don't feel like I need to ask for a change in the text. I think we understand that when it makes sense to go straight to council, then we would go that way and not hold ourselves to a study session first. And in the other cases, when we do want a study session, this kind of lays out the path. So I'm happy with the conversation.
Okay.
If I'm understanding that correctly, how this is actually going to be codified, I think this is kind of a minor codification. It's our own work process. It's not really a city code or something like that. We need that level
Well,
of
no,
formality.
it's not. But I think by stating this, we are setting expectations with the mayor and potentially with the council. So it is our own work process, and I'm happy to put a caveat at the front of it that states that it's simplified or something like that. And particularly if it gets picked up and used at other commissions, we probably want to make it a little more clear that this is not a rigid process. It's not legally compelled. The council hasn't blessed it, but that it's a reasonable process to go forward on. And I've already gotten some positive feedback about it from the other commissions. So anyway, that's where it's at. And so I will take an action item to make it clear what I just said. Okay, are there any other comments on this memo? Things that people would like to see changed? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. So with that, I think we're ready to move on to clean buildings, the home energy score. I think Bob is going to be the master of ceremonies for this.
Okay, thanks, I am. And we do have Gary Addington in the waiting room, so let me go ahead and upgrade him to a participant. Let's see, promote to panelist. And he should pop into our screen in just a second. And then I'll make a short introduction. Once we see him, he has to turn on his, there he is,
There we go.
Greg. Hey, Greg. I said Gary, I meant Greg.
All right.
I'm thinking Gary Schaff, who's right above you on the screen. We've asked, as I conferred with Rick and Stu about asking Greg Addington to join us in this discussion today. This is really a follow-on from some of our previous discussions. As you will recall, at our November 18th discussion of the Climate Policy Commission, we had a presentation from the Oregon's Department of Energy and also from Earth Advantage, and had a very robust discussion, I think, of home energy scores. And I think we've gone quite far down the path of developing a policy proposal for consideration by the council about mandating a home energy score at the time of listing of sale of real estate and housing residences of certain types in Ashland. I had mentioned in that meeting back in November that we started having a discussion with some members of our local real estate community. And after that meeting, we were able to schedule a meeting with that group. And that's Greg Addington from the Rogue Valley Association of Realtors, and then a couple of our local realtors here in Ashland as well. And then Tanya and Chris and I met with him. Stu was trying to, but it was not able to because of internet connectivity. But we had a very good discussion, I think, and wanted to give after that meeting, I asked our real estate collaborators to put their heads together and see if they could come up with a proposal that we could put on the table on how we could work together as collaborators on something that really puts the need for substantial improvements in efficiency of home energy systems and gets energy scores out in front of the public when the home goes on sale as a joint project of the realtors and us. And Greg, was kind enough to come back with a couple of ideas, informal ideas, because they haven't had a huge amount of time to discuss it broadly within the Realtors Association, but came back with some ideas, and I just thought it would be useful for the members of this commission to hear from Greg directly about what some of those ideas are, and we could just kind of go back and forth. And then as we're getting ready, really to push forward with some discussions with council with a proposal. My hope is that we could present to council something where we're working hand in hand, arm in arm, tied at the hip, whatever, any metaphor you like, with the realtors on a program that is going to be really effective here. So I'd like to give the realtors an opportunity to do that. They've had discussions, similar discussions with the Wildfire Safety Commission a couple of years ago, and developed a program in collaboration with the Wildfire Safety Commission, where it's not quite the same situation as the Wildfire Safety Commission. There is an instrument, which is the home energy score, that is sanctioned by the state with a tool. And I think we certainly need to take advantage of that. But I'm curious and welcome Greg's presentation to us here today. So I've given a bit of an introduction, but wanted to set that stage and let you take the floor, Greg.
Well, thank you, Bob. I appreciate it very much. I work with the Rogue Valley Association of Realtors. It's sort of part-time. I do contract work, but have been around Southern Oregon almost all my life in different capacities, working on policy issues. And so I help them with just local policies, things like this that come up to interact with counties or cities. And yeah, as Bob said, I mean, I feel like we're late to the game, and I feel bad about that, but we're here, and we do really want to be try to find a way to be partners with you on, I don't think there's any disagreement on the end result, on what we're trying to achieve, what you're trying to achieve. And I think we basically support that. I think the realtor community gets concerned about the mandate component of it, the concern about costs, the concerns about does this delay closings and transactions, and in a lot of cases it gets tacked on with a lot of other things that have to happen. And that was a similar approach we had on the wildfire issue as well. It's like, is there another way, or maybe a better way, that we can as a partner help you get to that end goal? And that's really it. I just want to make sure you understand we're supportive of what you're trying to get to. And I think we think a better way might be to engage the realtor community in Ashland to get them fully on board as a partner, and using these home energy scores in a way that, instead of a sort of, hey, you have to do this, maybe it's a way to, if you're a seller, you're marketing your property, or you're going to do some upgrades because you want that score to be higher when you put this property on the market. If you're a buyer's agent, now you can have a conversation with your buyer about what to look for and what these scores mean, and maybe this becomes more of a market driven approach. And I don't have a lot, and I should also say Colin Milan, Rick Harris, I've talked to both. They wanted to be here. They're both traveling right now and couldn't be here, but they're great resources. They work with local builders on sustainable buildings. They are all in on this kind of thing. They're just not all in on the mandate component of it because of, I think they would tell you, and with their experience, that they think you'll be more successful at doing it as an incentive as opposed to a mandate. And I'm sure that's arguable, but I guess the message I want to convey to you is that while I'm short on some detail, I can assure you that we are more than willing to roll up our sleeves and figure out a program that makes sense and work with you to achieve the results you want to get. And Bob, I'm just going to take a pause there. I think we could probably go a lot of different directions here. I'm not completely clear on the timing and what needs to happen when. Obviously, we can make this more of a priority. The thing that we have some ability to do, as we did in the wildfire group, is we can go after some resources to help with some education. One of the big things, and again, I'm not promising. I haven't done the outreach on this yet, and it's not apples to apples, as Bob mentioned with the fire stuff. But we did a training with home inspectors that was a big ticket item, and we brought the National Fire Protection folks from Boise here to train home inspectors on what to look for around properties for fire readiness. And so that was a value added to home inspectors, right? They get that. They now get to put that on. That was free of charge to them. They now get to put that on their resume or list of services, and so they're now out there. That's one of the things when they go inspect, they're going to be looking at these kind of things and making a report to buyers or sellers. And so those are the kind of things I wonder about. Disclosures. You can have these sort of voluntary disclosures that the realtors go through, these just like asbestos or lead paint or things like that, where they've got this checklist they go through. If we had the right home energy folks, do some training with the realtors, do training with home inspectors to get, again, more buy-in from that community, from that side of it. So I'll take a pause there, but that's generally our ideas right now, and possibly more, education-wise or public awareness, things like that.
Go ahead, Greg. Thanks, Gary. Greg. Rick, we can't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry about that. So you just mentioned lead and asbestos and those sorts of things. Do you have example? I believe at least both of those were mandated by various state governments. Do you have an example of something that the realtor community is already doing on a voluntary basis that is in that sort of checklist? And can you speak to how that came into being?
Well, one thing, just to full disclosure, I'm not a realtor, so I am at a loss when I don't have a member here to kind of talk about the process they go through. But I mean, the wildfire situation in Ashland's one that we just did, and so on our checklist or disclosures for realtors operating within Ashland. When they are selling a home, they go through that checklist, and so they have the materials that we help develop with the council that they will go through with homeowners or buyers or sellers on that particular issue. I'm sure there are more, and I'm sorry that Rick or Colin isn't here to be more specific on that, and I can follow up.
Yeah, so follow-up would be great on that, but even I'm not personally aware of exactly how long and what the process was for getting the wildfire thing in place. So if you're able to speak to that process, that would be interesting as well.
Yeah, and so I don't know if I sent Bob a copy of the sort of outline that we went through on the wildfire stuff, and we kind of attacked it. What I'll say is it got really disjointed because we couldn't do the in-person inspector training because COVID happened, and so we had this huge sort of pause in the middle of everything, and then we cranked up the campaign, which was included a lot of Facebook ads and targeted Facebook ads and some digital ads about just, hey, driving people to the Ashland Fire and Rescue website. This is how you make your property fire ready. So we were trying to do a little bit of public awareness around that. We started that exactly 2 weeks, I think, before the Alameda fire broke out. And so we just put that on pause and then kicked it off and did it this spring. But to give you an idea, so National Fire Protection Association training for home inspectors. We created, co-branded with Ashland Fire and Rescue, some digital, well, we did the graphics. They had a lot of that material already created. We paid for printing. I don't know how many, I think I know we have 1,000 brochures that every real estate office in Ashland has copies of it. It's at I believe at the chamber, the fire department has them. And this is the fold out brochure, the trifold, and it shows, here's a list of fire hardened plants. So you can landscaping materials. This is how far away your fence should be from your house. So just things like that. We worked with the fire department to develop a continuing education course for realtors. So realtors have to have so many credits a year to operate. So within Ashland, we advertise. So once a year, I just checked in with the fire and rescue folks. We're going to set up that training again for this year, or early next year. So they'll just walk through all the things you need to be aware of as a homeowner, and that's something that the brokers will go through with their clients. We ran Facebook ads about the Firewise communities, and again, that was all directed to get people to the fire and rescue website where they had a lot of information. And then the Realtor advisory form, that's what I was trying to say earlier. The advisory form was the checklist. I think I said checklist, but it's basically an advisory form that they walk through and say, okay, here's one thing you need to be aware of. You're in a wildfire hazard area if you live in the city of Ashland, and here's the resources and materials you need, and the questions you should be asking if you're buying a house, which we think will inform, that eventually translate to sellers when they're selling a house saying, I want to sell my house, so I'm gonna move these shrubs back, or I'm gonna get rid of this or that. So that was just the phase one. We went on, we printed brochures. We did some local radio on it in the Rogue Valley, not necessarily in Ashland. We ended up with a direct mail piece. It didn't go to, I should say that it didn't go to every address in Ashland. The National Association of Realtors has a database of, they call it consumer advocacy. So people who have interacted with in some way or another with homeownership issues. And please don't ask me like how they track all this, but it's a little spooky, but they do track all these kind of things. So they had a pretty good database. I think it was over 5,000 people. I think I'd have to look at that. So anyway, did a direct mail piece again. We got the information. We didn't put the content. We said, Ashland Fire and Rescue, what do you want on this direct mailer? What would make you happy, and when do you want it to go out? And we were able to cover the cost to make that happen. There were some online ad placements, distributing the materials. That's to all the offices. The advisory form put into circulation. And then we had the in-person inspector training. We had to wait till the COVID. So that was, in a nutshell, that was the work we worked with the committee on and came up. We spent a lot of time with the folks at the Ashland Fire and Rescue. Again, we're not the content originators, and we wouldn't want to be in this case either. We would expect that the city or you folks have the expertise, but how can we help, widely distribute that material in a way that you can see a meaningful result? I mean, I think Councilor Graham will tell you that. I mean, the Ashland Fire and Rescue has a score on every property in town. They've done drive-bys, and they've given each property within the city limits a score based on its, I'm probably using the wrong terminology, fire readiness or fire preparedness. And so we hope that this effort with realtors, the other thing I'll say is, I don't know what the numbers are, 20% a year, the turnover on transaction and home sales, something like that. Well, why limit yourself to that? Why can't we go out there and be, approaching all the homeowners at the same time with, hey, this is what you need to do to increase your energy score or, improve your fire score. So, in a few years, once we've had a chance to really get this campaign fully engaged for a couple of years, do the outreach, do the education with buyers and sellers, are we going to see a difference? Will we see those scores go down as the fire department does a reevaluation? And Councilor Graham did say at the meeting we had, it's like there's always the option to go back and mandate that you got to have an inspection at the time of sale. But I don't know. I just feel like, Rick and Colin would tell you in Portland that there's people that are paying a $500 fine just to not do the inspection because it's a hassle. They can't get it in a timely fashion, and they're worried that somehow, it's just that it's going to affect their transactions.
So I think that's very helpful, Greg. And I think, just to put maybe a bit of a summary on it, the way I'm thinking of it, I'm thinking of a collaborative, and I like what you said about, each of us playing our specific roles. The Climate Policy Commission, and we would be able to help, tweak the information that's available in the actual home energy score tool. There is a tool. We wouldn't do very much to it, but there's some space for, putting some additional information. That's the conversation that we had with the folks from Department of Energy and Earth Advantage at our last meeting. And then I would see and so we would make sure that we all have that content. We're good with it. And then I would see the real estate agents really being out there in front. And as you do your advertisements to, advertise, sell your home with me. And, the real estate agents would say, yeah, this is part of what you do, and not just staging your living room so that it looks beautiful, but, you're also staging your water heater, before you ever, so that it's a high efficiency heat pump electric water heater. That's part of what you do because it's going to make your house more attractive. And then on the other side, as you said, the buyer's agents really working with the buyers to make sense of, this is the price you're paying for the house, but then there's energy, utility components of it all, and then having a place to put all those. So having these scores, because it would be a score, it would live on the multiple listing service, which is where it would need to be in order to really provide clear information for the buyers. It would be there, but it wouldn't just live there. It's something that's available, at all times, because the new buyer would have the score and say, well, this is kind of a list of things that I could do to make these improvements over the next couple of years. So I can see the advantages of a collaboration like this, where you're really getting out there in front with the things that you do best. We're not salesmen. The realtors are educators, and you have the logical place to hang these things as well. So I know I see that Ray has a comment or a question.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for coming, Greg. It's great to hear. And certainly I think we need a collaboration. When I was listening to your concerns initially, I was wondering how many realtors in the Portland area had the same issues when this was put forward to them. And I don't know how much time they've had to develop their program. I hate to give up on making it mandatory, but I could understand maybe you'd start out with it voluntary and see how it goes. You mentioned you had some feedback from Portland. I'm wondering if it's worth more discussion with them to understand how the program's working there, and maybe what are the differences between that more populated area and where we are that would make us have to make changes to adapt to our realtors down here. I mean, I know we're starting out with a lack of inspectors, but I would think that would ramp itself up as the program gets going.
Ray, thank you. I actually have reached out starting the end of last week. I have some counterparts in the Bend area who what I understand, I talked to my counterpart in Bend, they had proposed a mandatory program a few years ago. And I suppose a similar thing to this. It was the realtors coming in and really opposing it more than saying, hey, we want to work with you. But nonetheless, the result was a pause, and they waited. And it sounds like those conversations are happening again in that area. And so I actually have a counterpart in Portland I've got a message into, Ray. And I'd just be happy to follow up more about some details. Maybe even there's people we could, have talked to you about it. But Colin and Rick are pretty passionate and do a much better job at articulating the ins and outs of the world of a transaction. But I'm happy to do any follow-up we can do. And I just put a lot of value in our folks being fired up in a good way on the front end of something like this. Like, I think people can get their head around this and really like it. But if I'm concerned if it's like this thing that becomes a burden to them, or they consider it a burden, they're not going to be doing all these things,
Well, it's getting people informed about climate issues, right? And buildings is one of our largest emissions. So it's one way to start decreasing those.
Right.
Gary, you wanted to?
Thanks, Greg. We clearly appreciate your help and insights. In terms of the collaboration with the Realtor community and the Climate Policy Committee, how would you see that moving forward? Is it some kind of a committee that collaborates? Is it, a couple people? How do you, given the experience with the wildfire safety issues, how would you see structuring that collaboration?
Well, and I would invite Councilor Graham to jump in here too. I was just thinking about your question, Gary, and what we did that worked, I thought pretty well, was had some initial meetings with the full, is it a committee? I can't, the committee or commission, I don't know what it was.
Commission.
Commission. And we, I think we kind of developed this, like, so what would be good for me to know is what would help you do? Is it a brochure? Is it a digital ad? Is it, I mean, the trainings seem like a no-brainer. That's something we can make happen. How do we engage the home inspectors? I mean, that seems like one we want to, you know, pursue. But like having a, you know, a little back and forth with a subset of this group, this full group, and a few of our folks is how that started. And then as we sort of got the universe of things that we wanted to do, we didn't know if we could do them all, but we had, let's just make a wish list. And once we had those, I worked really closely with, she's not there anymore, but Katie, Katie that was at the fire department. And Katie Gibble. And so then we really fine-tune stuff, and then we just share it back with folks as we went.
So thanks again. I know we've got another few minutes on this agenda item, and I don't want to take too much more time. I think what I've seen, there's interest from the commission in continuing to support, but as you also heard, we are anxious to move forward. We are anxious to put some policy proposals before the city council as soon as possible. So I think, you know, I don't have a whole lot of expectation that we're going to get too much done before the holidays are upon us. But I think it's really, you know, if the commission would agree or would endorse this, I think it's the work group that we already have on this topic, which is Chris Brown, Tanya Graham, and me, and of course with Stu Green from the city. And we could even expand that by one member or something. We would be the team to work with you on that. And really, I would hope our mandate, and I hope you would go back to the Real Estate Association and come back with a mandate to really work with us on this, you know, in very, you know, short fashion, so that, you know, early on in January, we could see whether, you know, what's our path forward on this, what would be the minimum requirements, you know, on the kind of a real effective collaborative, because, you know, you can collaborate on in general, or you can collaborate very specifically with real, you know, this is what we need. So I'd like to propose that would be the way forward. Tanya, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
You know, I think that's a good way forward. And I would just, you know, in the same way that the Wildfire Safety Commission, you know, their discussions were very urgent around the very real wildfire risk that we have. These conversations are very urgent. And what has struck me in the real estate world is people know what to expect when they're in real estate, when they're in a real estate transaction. And a lot of people are not used to seeing energy scores, and they're not used to seeing wildfire safety inspections and that sort of thing. And so I think that the educational element of this is going to be really important, because if we get a couple years out and we're not seeing this get taken up, you know, we're going to be back in that same position that Greg was mentioning, which is that, well, maybe we have to just make it mandatory. And I think anytime we can avoid that and have the market provide that signal, it's better. But that's going to mean the real estate agents really taking this to heart and helping their buyers understand that this is available if in fact they are interested. And I think we'll find that a lot of people moving into Ashland really are interested in those energy scores. So I think it's a good way forward, but I just want to put a marker down that we really do need to see some behavioral change that we think is happening in other places that have the mandatory program.
Yeah, and if I might, sorry, Chris, I think you were trying to get in there.
Just one last thing, Greg, thank you again for joining us today. And I feel like, just to kind of summarize to the CPC here in our kind of offline conversation we had, I think this is really an opportunity to provide almost an on-ramp to the city incentivization process, you know. And I think really our goal here is to not condemn or restrict. Our goal is to offer a way that we can bring efficiency standards higher within the city limits. I think thus increasing property values of said homes, oftentimes I think we have to really keep in mind of who we're trying to appeal to here. And it's not the higher market buyers who we're trying to help bring these homes into greater efficiency are those that need it the most, really the low income homeowners or those seeking to kind of enter the market. And how can they improve a lot of these homes that are inefficient due to just financial reasons and kind of limping along, if you will, with these kind of lower market homes. If there is such a thing in Ashland, which there is, and we spoke about that with Greg too. I mean, there really is a market here that we can try to appeal to, and I think that's who would take advantage of the city financing and incentivization process for home efficiency.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
100%. Thank you.
And I would just add one last thing, and that is that the Wildfire Safety Commission has been very pleased with the partnership with the realtors. And it has really, they're very proud of the work that that has been done working with the realtors. And so I'm excited to see where this goes.
Just on that note, I same here, and we're not done. I mean, we want to make this thing go so that we don't just fold our hands and in 2 years we go back and we haven't seen the progress, because that's the end goal. Same as this, we want to see the progress. It's just what's the best way to get there. And so we're happy to do it. We've used this as a model at the National Association. I've presented on this. People are like, wow, this is great. So it's been good. And again, I can't, I don't know all the resources, the exact same things would be there, but I think we can sure give it a try. And I know that our group will be committed to again, work with you. You're the experts, but let us help you get where you want to go. The other thing I just would throw in, I know you got to go. I appreciate the work you guys are doing. I come at these things at a little different perspective. I'm an old agriculture water policy guy, but I find myself on the Environmental Quality Commission appointed by Governor Brown, and my first meeting is next Thursday on the climate policy, climate protection policy. So I'm in the midst of reading hundreds of pages of information that I have a hard time getting my head around. So I appreciate the work.
Well, that's great to hear. Thanks for that, Greg.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you for taking that on. That's a huge responsibility.
It is. Thank you.
I don't know what I was thinking.
Well, we're counting on you. Great. Okay. Well, thanks, Greg, and I'll turn it back, Rick, to take back the agenda. Or Ray, did you something else on this?
No, I'm done. I had something for Rick.
Okay. Thanks, Greg. So we probably need to move him out of our little group here.
Yeah. Well, okay. Let me see.
Okay.
Rick, Ray, go ahead.
Yeah, I noticed Stu had to leave. So are we taking action items? Do we need to appoint someone to do that, or what are we doing here?
Well, the recording is going.
Okay.
I do depend upon Stu to give me access to it, and so I don't know when that's going to happen. So I'm afraid there's going to be a little bit of chaos here.
Okay. But I wrote down a few things. I can continue to do that. And,
that would be great. Thank you,
could
Ray.
help Stu out. Okay.
Great.
So if you're going to do that, if you can just fire them off to the entire commission as soon as you're able to compose an email, that would be great. There's no need for any review on it.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. That was quite enlightening. So now I think,
Rick, I was just curious, Sir Ray, were there any action items that you pulled out of that last agenda item?
Well, I think one of them was we're going to keep this group going forward, and I think we'll have Bob work with Greg to see if he can follow up some with Portland discussion. And I think that's about all I had. Did you have any others that you?
Okay, there are three of us working on this at this point. We could actually expand. Caitlin, would you? I was I liked some of the input you had on the indoor air quality last time, and I was wondering if maybe you want to join the group, or if you have bandwidth for that, or interest, or whether you're getting involved in something else that's already pulling you away.
Let's talk about that offline, Bob, and think what the implications would be.
Okay.
I think
Perfect.
one other thing might be if we can start thinking about developing a timeline. I know Greg had that question about, is this something that would happen next year, the year after? What are we looking at? So I think that's something for the CPC to discuss. And I'm sure we'll get feedback from council too.
Yeah, so I guess one comment that I want to make, and then I'll call on you, Gary. We don't necessarily need to wait on a study session because this is going forward. I think it's worthwhile to educate council no matter which direction this goes. And I'm curious whether Tanya has any opinion about that.
I think because this council has already seen a very similar process with the Wildfire Safety Commission, I'm not sure that it would merit its own study session, but it might be if it can be combined with another smaller topic. I think that could be helpful. It will be helpful to give the council an opportunity to ask questions about this. When it came forward from the Wildfire Safety Commission, there were concerns about the cost of the inspections, increasing the cost of real estate for lower income folks. And so there may be some detailed questions that would be useful to answer in a study session. But there's at least familiarity with what we're doing here, and there's a similar process that council knows about.
Okay, I think we can pursue that later. Gary?
So it would seem there's general, at least acquiescence, I should say, to the merits of pursuing some kind of a collaborative process with the realtor community, attempting at least initially to see whether the home energy score or some alternative that might be developed could serve as a voluntary measure, at least going forward until possibly at such time we conclude that it's not sufficient. But I think at this juncture, it would seem, at least to me, that the CPC can pursue the collaborative effort with the realtor community without actually going to the council for authorization to do that. We're just working with another collaborative organization to solve a problem that we identified. Is that true among other members?
Yeah, Bob?
Yeah, no, I think for me, I think that is true with just one amendment. I didn't hear anything, and I guess I would have some reservations. I would want some guidance from this group if you wanted to open it up more broadly in the way that you did, Gary. I wouldn't say some other tool. I think the home energy score, the actual instrument, is the best use of this. There's been a lot of work into figuring out, what's this. I don't see any reason why we would need to develop a different tool. So I would be looking to develop something with our Association of Realtor collaborators that would take advantage of that tool, provide it, support it with the education to realtors, to buyers, to sellers, all around inspectors, and then find a way to actually marry that tool, that score, onto the multiple listing service, but not via a mandate that it has to be done in order to sell real estate here in the city of Ashland. I think that's the thing. And I think that's a time-bound direction from this commission. I'm taking it as a time-bound commission. We didn't actually talk about a specific end date, but I know from previous discussions that we feel a sense of urgency, a collective sense of urgency. But I have a lot of confidence that the realtors also appreciate that and want to come up with something in the fairly short term. I don't want to put a date on it, but I think I agree with you that we could pursue that and come back to this commission with with a much more specific proposal in the short term. And that can be part of either a proposal to the city council if it turns out that we decide that a collaboration in that respect is not viable, or just information. And I think the council will be very, very supportive of having this commission come together arm in arm with the real estate commission, with the real estate association, to actually put something together that can be effective. But I think we're still considering those two options, with I think a very strong leaning towards working closely with the real estate association if that can come to fruition. Is that a fair summary of rendering?
Yeah.
think so, but I think Ray was wanting to get in here.
Right.
Yeah, I just want to, if it starts out voluntary and working, which is the way the realtors want to go, I would still like it to show up on a voluntary list so that the buyers see, oh, this is available, but we decided not to pursue it, rather than not even being aware that it exists.
Absolutely.
So it's something to consider.
Yeah, so we're starting to run out of time here, and I feel like several of you have expressed more or less the same consensus that we are going to engage with the realtors. And I want to note that one of the key players is not able to be here tonight. Stu has put a lot of work into this. And so what I'd like to suggest is that the group that Bob named, potentially with Caitlin added, are going to move forward engaging with the realtors, and that at our next meeting we'll get an update on how that's going and answer more of these questions that I'm sure we all have. I know I had a number of questions that popped into my mind that we simply didn't have time to address tonight. And so with that, I'd like to move forward. Is there any objection to that?
Good. Thanks, Rick.
Okay. So the next thing on the agenda is eliminating city of fossil methane infrastructure procurement. And Gary, you are the lead for that.
Yeah. So we had a somewhat abbreviated discussion of these topics, both the phase out of fossil gas and city infrastructure, and also the home or the carbon note. In an effort to facilitate our prospective presentation to the council, I put together a presentation that actually Bob is going to share his screen so that I can go through that. But ostensibly, we aren't much, I didn't have an opportunity to develop those ideas much beyond where they were before. So I'll go through this, and if there's refinements or additions, we can note those. And I think you need to be on the first slide, though. And there we go. Okay, so both of these obviously are internal city policies. So it makes at least the city council's deliberation process somewhat more straightforward. So next slide, Bob, please. So as with everything else we work on, we've got the Climate, Energy, and Action Plan, which ostensibly provides the context for what we do and why we do it. And these were originally stated in the memo that we reviewed last month. Ostensibly, the CEAP provides for the city to evaluate impacts from its operations and actually reduce its overall emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, fairly quickly, actually, and obviously achieve net zero by 2050. So the carbon note and the fossil gas phase out, as it's termed in this slide, are central to achieving those objectives. And those objectives are specifically recommended or at least identified in the SEEP, maybe not in so many words, but as is the case with the last statement, CC 3.1 in the left-hand column at the bottom of the page, consider climate change in all city council policy, budgetary, or legislative actions. So the carbon note basically helps us to fulfill that requirement. And similarly, the last statement, again, extracted from the SEEP on the right side of the slide, is to phase out fossil gas from city operations and promote switching to lower carbon fuels. So I think, at least in terms of the SEEP policies and the direction that the plan set out back in 2017, both the carbon note and the fossil gas phase out are basically intrinsic to achieving the objectives that the council approved back in 2017 when it adopted the SEEP. Next slide, Bob. So this ostensibly says what, if adopted, the carbon note and the fossil gas phase out would do. And the carbon note basically provides a consistent format and content to evaluate what impacts, again, greenhouse gas emission impacts would occur with larger projects. And that seems essential for the city council to then establish whether that larger municipal project is in fact consistent with the SEEP and prudent given what we know about climate change and fossil gas or greenhouse gas emissions. And similarly, the fossil gas phase out is pretty straightforward. Basically says we can't be using gas anymore. We've got to use something that moves us towards carbon neutrality, which is what, again, the SEEP asked the city to achieve over the near term. And we're hoping that the council will embrace these approaches in order to do so. So the next slide, if you would, Bob, basically outlines at least what I see is, the benefits, and public education and demonstrating leadership are two of the main ones in terms of articulating facts that the public can draw upon in assessing the city's commitment and delivery in reducing its greenhouse gas emissions. The carbon note in particular is important because if we don't begin to change the city's greenhouse gas emission levels, then it will be impossible for us to reach the 2030 goal, which at this juncture is only 8 years away. And certainly maintaining the status quo which has happened since 2017, hasn't gotten us very far. Yes, we've got some electric vehicles in the city's fleet. The Parks Department has acquired some electric mowers, but we certainly aren't making the progress that we need in order to get to carbon neutrality by 2030. And ostensibly, it's the same with the fossil gas phase out. If we don't change what we're doing, we can't possibly succeed. It's that simple. And certainly in the case of fossil gas, largely, if we make those investments today in our new public buildings, those investments in that fuel type will continue to be used over 50 or 100-year time frame. absent some major remodel. So it's essential that we start transitioning from fossil gas to electrifying our building infrastructure in the city's inventory. Next slide, please, Bob.
Hey, Gary, I got a question for you on the carbon.
Yeah, yeah.
Is there going to be a project size, either monetary value or size of emissions where you would invoke the carbon note? We're not saying every little action the city does, you got to go through the carbon note.
I think that's specified in the ordinance, but I
Okay,
will have to look back.
that's
and
okay.
see what it is.
I'm assuming that we're going to have that in there someplace.
Yep.
Okay.
It's largely, as I recall, a percentage cost based upon the general fund expenditure. So we tie the scale to the current year's general fund budget as a way of scaling it forward. So as the general fund budget increases or decreases, we adjust that threshold to coincide with that scale of project, basically. So we are always consistent with its application. So next slide. So at our last meeting, the commission asked that we identify some projects that are likely to be impacted by both the carbon note and the fossil gas phase out. And I've made a stab at what those might look like. I'm not confident in most of these or many of these, but on the fossil gas phase out, certainly the Daniel Meyer pool and the Public Works building would both presumably fall under that. As we discussed at our last meeting, the issue of whether the fossil gas phase out would be applicable to remodeling was not determined, but certainly an issue that either we need to decide or we need to present to the city council to determine the direction on that. In terms of the carbon note, I don't really have insights sufficient to list any more projects than I have on the fossil gas phase out, and that reflects more my lack of knowledge about the budget and prospective projects. It would seem consistent with our discussion about the water treatment plant. That's a decision that's presumably already been made and wouldn't be subject to the carbon note, although had the carbon note been in effect at that time, certainly that scale of project would have been subject to the carbon note.
I just would add in here, I think that there's having the threshold is useful, but I think there's a question of timing. Some of the things that come before council are projects that over the lifetime of that project would be important from an energy standpoint, but might not hit a particular threshold. And so I think we want to really think about what triggers that threshold. And then in terms of the wastewater or the water treatment facility, we've approved it to go on to the next level of design, but at any point in this process, the council can decide not to go forward with the project any longer, or to switch off of the goal that we have. We've got a goal in terms of the and I can't remember the name of the program right now, but it's the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure, I believe. Their design program. And I think we're going towards gold standard on it. But at any point, the council could say, oh, we no longer want to pursue that. And so I think even for projects that are underway, it seems like it makes sense to introduce this concept.
I would come back to the question that Ray asked. In the ordinance, we have, in this draft, at least I can say that, I think, the term program, capital improvement, or policy with a significant revenue implication includes an ordinance or resolution in which implementation may entail expenditures in any budget year or cumulative over a 5-year period in excess of $582,037. Anyway, the threshold above shall be indexed to the general fund with 2021, 22 budget year serving as the base year. So roughly $500,000, and it's subject to the phase out of the carbon project. Or excuse me, subject to the carbon note.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
when I was reading that, I wasn't quite clear what would make the threshold, but now that we've had this discussion, I'll take another look at it and see if I'm understanding what comes up, because I just know that some of the things we're looking at are coming up in our enterprise funds and they're, capital improvements. And the question is, do we go this way or do we go this way? And
right.
in the near term, there's not necessarily a big difference, but in the long term,
Yeah.
there certainly could be. And so I just need to look at that again now that we've had this conversation in light of some of the conversations that have come in front of council.
Yeah. I think that, the threshold is a critical issue for us. When and over what term is it important for us to examine it? It seems to me, at least, that using some kind of a monetary threshold is the easiest way to assess whether a project or capital improvement program is subject to the carbon note or not. But there may be other alternatives to that, but I'm not sure what they would be.
Right. And just, right now with that threshold, the community center wouldn't be part of the conversation.
Okay.
It wouldn't need a carbon note. Because the council has decided to move forward with a fix that is just a bare bones fix, right? So I don't know which threshold number gets used, the number that it would take to fully bring that structure up to code, or the number for this different proposal that council has moved forward with. So it's just, just some things that I'm thinking about in terms of operationalizing it, but this is good work.
Yep, I would say, in my estimation, that the threshold as it relates to the community center is the cost of that remodel. End of story. Unless it's an ongoing program, maybe it would include the expected energy expense over a 5-year period, but that's probably more complicated than it need be. Okay, so next slide, please.
That was the end. That was the last slide.
Oh, okay. There was, at least I intended, let me get it up on mine and I'll just review it. So there, okay, good. Okay, I need to go back to the previous slide. What are the costs?
Okay. Let me see if I can get that up again.
Sorry, I apologize.
Let's see. We got this, and this, and this.
There we go.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's it. Thank you. That's so. You may remember in the write-up for the fossil gas phase out, I had used a table from the Oregon Public Utility Commission order that looked at life cycle costs for gas and heat pump heated residences. I reviewed that more closely today, and in my rush to submit the agenda item to Rick, I put in some misinformation. Anyway, this slide reflects what I believe the Public Utility Commission's write-up actually reflects, which is that the cost of a heat pump system will be roughly 1.5 times that of a gas system with a air conditioner cooling system added to it. There are innumerable factors embodied within the PUC's write-up. In fact, I would encourage you to review that, just because I think it provides some valuable insights into the challenges that we face gaining conversion from fossil gas to electricity, again, largely because of the costs and the relatively small incentive that the city currently offers. It's rather sobering, but I should add that for the heat pump systems, they being the Public Utility Commission staff and their consultants, included a backup heating source, which at least I don't believe would be required with the heat pumps that have higher SEER ratings, but that is something for Stu and other technical staff to figure out, because I'm not an expert on any of those things. But again, my general interpretation is that if you take the capital costs of the various gas-fired heating equipment plus an air conditioner backup, and you compare those to a heat pump system plus some backup heating source in the case of an emergency, the heat pump systems generally cost 1.5 times the cost of the gas system, again, over the life of the heat pump system.
And does that take into account the anticipated costs of different fuels into the future? I just wonder because, based off of our current climate policies or, the Paris Climate Accords, it's likely that if, we work towards limiting the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere by 2050, fossil fuels will become much more expensive from today into the future in comparison to other fuel sources, including natural gas. And I've seen some references that have shown by 2030, the cost of natural gas may go up substantially. So I'm just curious if that is taking that into account.
Most of I believe that the costs were all based upon 2016 dollars. So, and I don't recall seeing any attempt to adjust the cost of either electricity or fossil gas going forward. So I have to presume that they simply looked at consumption, average consumption for the structure that they were evaluating, and projected that over the 18-year lifetime of a heat pump to compute the life cycle fuel costs. But that said, the real difference, again, according to the PUC's write-up, is the upfront costs of the system. Most of the difference is there, not in the fuel costs.
Yeah, I get Gary. I can't tell whether Chris is still on, but Chris and I had some experience, and Chris has a lot more experience than I do, applying these kinds of cost calculations and needs for from residential systems to public buildings that, have, certain occupancies and codes that apply to those occupancies. So it just seems to me that it's a little bit hazardous to even guess what the cost of the phase out would be, because it's so particular to the specific building. And we're only talking about, with the city infrastructure, it's really just it's a fairly small set of buildings. So rather than kind of hypothesize based on some sort of rule of thumb or metric based on residential, I think it'd be better to do a little bit of digging into the specific buildings and what would be the code requirements there. I'm hearing Chris. I think Chris is there. He's got a lot more experience on this than I do. Chris, am I off base?
I would say that, and before Chris gets on, the first sentence of that slide on the fossil gas phase out basically reiterates what I said at our meeting last month, which is we really can't know what the costs of alternative fuel systems are for a building that has yet to be designed. Maybe it's better just to leave it at that. I felt that trying to provide some insights would be helpful to answer the question of what's the implication of this on city financing. I know full well that the council will ask that question, and I certainly don't have an answer for it absent something that's generalized like this one. Chris, did you want to add on?
I think for the most part, you're right there, Gary. It's very difficult to look at a general multiplier ratio in terms of cost. I think one of the biggest things we have found as a limiting factor in terms of some of our larger institutional work is, again, the resource capacity of our existing electrical grid and subsequent dependencies. Especially when you're going beyond the residential scope and you're looking at multipliers into hundreds of thousands of square feet of conditioned space. And I know that the city's not on that magnitude, but I think that's one of the main bottlenecks, if you will, right now, is just electrical capacity and then subsequent cost with support infrastructure in terms of transformer size and actual physical infrastructure that's currently in place to service those installations.
Rick, you want to add?
Well, the cost thing is something we just have to address. I understand that it is impossible to be precise until you've actually designed a building or have a particular building in mind. But I believe that case studies, which I think are readily available, although I can't give you a pointer just off the top of my head, is an appropriate first step to making it plausible that making this fuel switching for commercial buildings like the city owns wouldn't break the bank. Another thought that I've had is that there aren't that many city buildings. And so getting a few examples that are specific to Ashland and investing the effort in understanding what goes on with those is not a trivial amount of work. I'm not trying to deny that. It's a lot of work, but I don't know how we're going to move forward with getting the people who are responsible for the purse strings on board with this thing without doing that work. And I don't think that the commissioners themselves are necessarily the most appropriate people, with the possible exception of Chris, because we're not really in the game. What I would like to see is for us to develop relationships with local contractors that do commercial work, or look to some place like Amoresco, which helps cities deal with commercial buildings. And at any time, Chris, tell me where I'm getting this wrong. That they would have both examples, and if they were presented with a specific building, could speak with a lot more knowledge than I have in the commercial area. So I realize that this is not a trivial amount of work, but I feel like to go forward, that's the path that we need to go down.
I think even if we don't have the numbers, listing the 4 or 5 or 8 things that would influence that cost would be useful to see, even if we don't have the numbers. So I got an action item here that you guys are going to revisit this. And oh, I know what I was going to say. When looking at the city buildings, are we talking about this action takes place either with new construction or when old infrastructure is getting replaced? Or are we talking about a phase in over time, eventually where all buildings? What buildings are candidates? How does it work?
As we discussed, or as the ordinance provides, and I have to look to get there. We had suggested, or the draft ordinance suggests, that any construction or remodeling would have be subject to the rule at if it was $10,000 or more, which isn't much of a remodel. So ostensibly for any new construction and any remodel, we would expect that to happen. Again, that was a point of interest at our last meeting. Some members of the commission thought that only in the case where a remodel included the alteration of the heating and air conditioning system would the phase out of fossil fuel come into play. That's clearly, again, either an issue that we need to solve before we advance it to the council, or one that we need to point out to them and ask them for direction.
I would agree, because if you're going to say upgrade the windows and, oh, you did that, now you got to replace the gas system. I'm not sure that's how that should work, but I don't have a good proposal.
It's
really about how much money you have and how long it's going to take you to convert the city over.
Well, and two, how serious are we about meeting the seat goals? I mean, to get to where we have the thresholds that we've established, we have to move pretty aggressively, and not over a 30-year period, but rather a 10-year period.
True. But as more pressure is put on by the PUC on the gas utilities, which may change the cost, it may be clearer to see in the future that you're better off retiring your infrastructure on gas and going with electric. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we have the electric infrastructure to handle the heat load.
It's a complicated wicket for sure.
Yeah.
Bob, you had a comment or a question?
Yeah, no, I think it's on this very point. I mean, so these are two different things. One is the carbon note and a threshold on to what kind of policies they would apply. The other is the I phase out of gas. I think it's actually the way you presented it last time. It's a ban of procurement of gas infrastructure for the city, natural gas infrastructure for the city. So that, to me, the simplest way to approach this is anytime the city needs to do something, replace, I guess, it's a gas hot water heater, a gas stove, a gas furnace, whatever. It needs to then replace it with a non-gas fueled system, and doesn't matter what the threshold is. It could be just a cooktop somewhere. We're not going to be buying more cooktops. The cities shouldn't be buying more gas cooktops. So the remodel, how big the remodel is, how small the remodel is, to me, what's the driver is whether the city feels like it needs to replace its aging equipment. Now, I would love the city, in addition to that, to say, well, no, we believe we need to go even faster than that. So we're going to go on a schedule of early retirement of our gas fueled infrastructure. I think that in turn depends upon the municipal facilities plan that I know Stu has said that the city wants to do, and the seat calls for, that really lays out a whole plan of retirement and conversion of these things. And then it depends a whole lot more. Then it actually drives some of the decisions on the upgrading of the electric service that you've got, and really taking into account what's going to happen in the building. I think even the simpler standard that I would articulate at the beginning, just no more replacement, no more purchase of gas infrastructure, that will make some challenges in some places, because you'll have an emergency. Some building has got that's what happens with residences too. They've got a gas furnace that they need to replace, and they're going to want to replace it soon, quickly, and they're not going to be ready because the service is not adequate. But that's part of the job of the facilities department, I think. So I guess to bring this to my comment to a close, I would simplify extremely the gas. I think you called it a phase out this time. We just call it it's just a ban on procurement. It's a procurement ban on natural gas equipment. Did I get that? Am I missing something, or am I making it too simple?
I like that.
Well, I would say that I feel like you said two different things tonight. Your most recent statement, I would say, would be applicable where I feel like this group has a reasonable amount of knowledge, and that's in residential and very light commercial. Once you get into these bigger buildings, I don't personally know.
I'm sorry, Rick, I'm not applying it all to residential. I'm talking about city buildings only. I understood this is only.
I understand that. I'm talking about.
There's no residential buildings.
I understand that. The point is that I believe this group has a reasonable amount of knowledge about how things go in a residential set application, and that knowledge transfers to light commercial to a great extent. But once you start getting into these bigger buildings, they are very different beasts. And at least I personally don't actually know what the answer is as far as what the cost trade-offs are. Both from a capital and an operating point of view. And I would very much like to have more knowledge about that, both from the perspective of people who do work in that field all the time. And I mentioned one company that has worked with the city, but also just a roster of what buildings the city has that would fall into that bin. I doubt it's very long, and start building up our knowledge base from both angles is what I would like to see happen as a next step.
I think, Bob, your suggestion that we just simply come out and say we are going to ban future fossil gas appliances of any kind within the city's buildings is a very prudent, practical, and simple approach. Now, I don't think this commission, with the exception of Chris, has any capacity whatsoever to establish the cost profile of that choice as a public policy. But simply from a public policy standpoint, which is our commission's domain, we should be just advancing the ban. And we should rely in doing that on the city staff or an outside consultant or whomever to assess the cost implications of that, because certainly the council is going to be interested in that, but we don't have the capacity to analyze that. And we could spend the next year working out details of what that might look like, and somebody could still question the veracity of our analysis. So from my standpoint, our obligation as a commission is to move this policy forward as a ban, as Bob suggested, and simply let that recommendation sit on council's desk and let them figure out what information they need from whatever experts they can draw upon to assess the cost implications, the environmental implications, the human resource implications, if there are any, which in the case of fossil gas burning appliances or cooktops, we know there are human impacts. So again, I think it's within our prerogative to advance a very simple ban and let the council figure out what information they need in order to move forward. Certainly, and I'll stop in one more minute, certainly in adopting the SEEP, they understood that there would be changes necessary and were willing to commit to that without knowing what the costs were. This policy simply moves that to the next step, which is, okay, either put up or shut up. This SEEP has to move forward, and a policy such as the one that Bob's suggesting is essential to get there. I'm done.
I agree
Yeah,
with
Tanya,
Gary and I
Tanya.
agree with Gary and Bob. And I mean, to me, it's very cut and dry that we know the city cannot achieve its emissions targets if we continue to burn fossil gas in our city buildings. So, it's not compatible with the SEEP. It's not compatible with the plans the city's adopted. So I like this proposal.
Tanya, did you?
Yes, I think it's right that we need to put this forward in a simple way. I would actually phrase it as a phase out that is accomplished by prohibiting any future purchases of natural gas driven infrastructure, equipment, something like that. One of the things we might consider doing is talking to Public Works about where might they see this becoming a problem? Because I think it's most likely, and following up behind what Rick was saying, it's most likely that it's a problem in the bigger systems. And so if that's the case, then this signal needs to get sent as quickly as possible that says that business as usual is not going to work for those bigger systems, so that they can in fact prepare for the day when that system needs to be replaced. The problem that residences have is, an order of magnitude smaller than when you're looking at something much bigger. But if that signal is sent clearly that says when this has to be replaced, it has to be replaced in a different way, then I think staff can start to put into their work plans the work to design the switch. And if we talk to Public Works, what they can tell us is if there is something in the system that is simply not possible, the technology is not there, or something. If there is a major hitch, because we don't want to hear that hitch when staff stands in front of council and says, this is impossible in these 3 places, right? Because then the whole thing goes down. So in the same way that we've talked about engaging with stakeholders, in this case, the stakeholders are actually the facility managers at the city. So I think it makes sense for us to talk to them and just see what do they see as in terms of how difficult would this be, and where might they need additional resources? Because that might be part of the conversation with council.
I agree with Tanya. I think the verbiage is important to call this a phase out rather than ban. I think that's a positive nomenclature for that. And I would also just add to that, I think, to summarize what you just stated, where feasible. And I think that feasibility analysis needs to happen at each instance, just because that's what I've encountered oftentimes is there are prohibitive limitations that are beyond reasonable fulfillment. And sometimes those, are the nature of infrastructure. You cannot simply bring the amount of, or the capacity of power to an installation that's necessary to run, say, a electric heating system currently. And I do think that perhaps that feasibility analysis is a pivot point that we can utilize in some of our verbiage, where every instance of improvement that the city performs, they need to submit a feasibility analysis and a report for how these measures can be accomplished to the best of their capacity. Does that make sense?
That's not dissimilar to the current policy, administrative policy that the city has on fossil gas that was developed under council or under city manager, or what was the right term back when
Administrator.
Kelly was
Administrator.
city
Administrator.
Right. When Kelly was running or functioning in that capacity, she approved a policy which I'll send around, which basically required the evaluation and assessment of the fossil gas fuel use and a justification of why and when it would be allowed, or at least asking the department managers to make that case. So in some ways, what you're suggesting, Chris, is that we formalize that policy at the city council level as contrasted with then at administrative level.
And
sorry, go ahead.
I'm not trying to provide a loophole, if you will. I agree with the intent here that we're all proposing. I do think that there needs to be fundamental analysis in each instance. And I think that provides a better optic.
And if I could add on to that, I agree, Chris. And I think maybe what the process of it might need to be is that, we are switching unless it can be shown that it's not possible to switch, or, it's not reasonable to switch. But it's not simple, it's not an easy threshold to clear, but it is in fact clearable in those situations where this really doesn't make sense for some reason that we can't see at this point. But so that doesn't come across as a loophole, but it does in fact give that flexibility that's needed.
The problem that we really have here, in my estimation, is it all comes back to money, right? That's really what we've spent 20 minutes talking about, is money. And if we're going to change behaviors and change our impact on climate, we're going to have to spend more money. Bob did when he changed his heating system. I did when I upgraded or added a heat pump. I mean, all those actions require expenses that are above what would normally be expected. It's not the cheapest cost thing. And it's that conundrum that I think is difficult for us to grapple with, because it could, one council could say, no, we're not going to tolerate any expense over the cost of a gas or a fossil fueled appliance. We just aren't going to do that. We're going to take the lowest cost option. I don't think that's what we want to say.
I don't think that's what we are saying. Oh, go ahead, Bob.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I like the the terminology that you Tanya proposed, and about a phase out, and I liked the Chris's amendment as well. Yeah, it definitely has to be, there has to be a feasibility analysis. It has to be feasible. I would like to, in order to move forward on this, I would like to get to engage as soon as possible. Maybe have the presentation from the facilities folks to the commission about something. Well, what are let's lay out the list of buildings. Let's that doesn't have to be the full scale municipal plan, in order to have some initial conversations about how does this look, and because people are intimately familiar with these buildings. As Rick said, there's not that many of them that are going to be of the scale that are so complex. And I think on the cost, we always go around that. The city, in the way I look at things, the city in actually deciding to embed the SEEP in municipal code, basically said there's a cost to inaction. We're not going to quantify what that cost of inaction is, but it's so high. The cost of inaction is so high that Ashland as a community has decided that we can no longer not act, or we must act in order not to put it into a double negative. And that's a mandate to push forth and to push above what might be comfortable. Now, I think Chris is absolutely right. There are just some facilities, some spaces, some auditoriums, massive, places that might just be so difficult and so costly to condition, with non-gas equipment because of all the service requirements and I don't know, all these ERS and everything else. So we have to look at that. But I think that it'd be really nice to get a sense from the facilities people before we move this much forward on, what are we talking about? Is that one building? Is that two buildings? Is that nothing?
Okay, so I feel like we're starting to beat it to death. And I feel like we are getting some consensus around talking to the facilities folks. I've generally found that bringing in people who work with things every day becomes a very enlightening experience very rapidly. So I'd like to propose that would be our next step on this thing, is to talk to the people who are actually responsible for it. And so unless there's objection to moving forward in that fashion, I'd like to bring this part of the agenda to a close. Yeah, go ahead, Gary.
That covers the phase out of fossil gas in city buildings. How about the discussion of the carbon note? Do we want to try to figure that one out at tonight's meeting, or do we want to postpone that till January?
I think we kind of burned up the time that was available. Okay. As you were moving forward with a combined presentation, I added those times together, and we've already blown through all that and more. So I don't want to go back to this. As you rightly point out, it's a very intertwined situation.
Well, Gary, I did put down one action for carbon note to kind of revisit what the threshold is.
Okay, so I think we've identified a reasonable next step for this. What I'm not sure of is who's going to reach out to the city staff. I think working through Stu is probably our best bet. And so, Gary, do you want to engage with Stu on that, or do you want me to do that?
I'll follow up.
Okay. So we have about 25 minutes left. I would like to be sure that we get to both the municipal code modification and wrap up. And so I'm going to propose that we do those things right now and then come back to the other two items in old business. Is there any objection?
Well, Rick, I can give a 2-minute update on the path of fossil gas.
Okay, that's fine. That'll leave plenty of time for.
Okay.
time.
So that'll give you some time back. So I only made changes based on some input from Caitlin and others on the section on RNG. So the phrasing is a little different now in terms of it's saying why RNG or hydrogen is not a viable replacement. Also added in some safety concerns and also looking at, well, where might RNG be used? Not only in buildings, but also in transportation. And then on the second page, whenever you have time, there also tracks some reference material if you want to learn more about this, some of the things that I've been using, and I'm welcome to add any other reference material that people want to send me. Okay, that's all I had.
Are there any questions or comments about this agenda topic? Okay, I'm not seeing any. The municipal code modification, I'm hoping this is pretty straightforward. For quite some time now, we have been working in an unusual fashion by having a council liaison as a voting member of the commission. And it is odd in a number of ways that I can go into if it's important, but I'm hoping it's not. And so mostly I'm presenting this so that the commission understands the direction that Tanya and I have already set in motion, but we could stop if the commission objects to it for some reason, and to keep you informed on it. I would point out that it tries to clarify what happens with student members and how we compute the quorum. And I also tried to clean up the people who must be on the commission to say strive to reflect rather than saying it shall reflect, because the reality is that we only have people on the commission who step forward and we're willing to serve, and that I don't think anybody would say is really a wide range of people in the community. So we continue to strive to do so. We're starting to add some gender diversity and hopefully we'll get more age diversity. But there's other kinds of diversity that we simply do not have. So with that, that was what I was trying to accomplish, and the way that this could go forward. Are there any comments or objections? Gary and then Bob. I can't hear you, Gary.
Is there some prohibition about extending the vote to people under the age of 18? Certainly they can't vote in general elections, but can they vote on our commission? If we had that stated in our charter?
I can't cite the specifics of it, but my understanding from a conversation that I've had quite some time in the past is that that's not possible. Okay. We could certainly pose the question to the city attorney if it's felt by this commission that that's an important thing to do.
Obviously, I, for one, feel that that is important to vest that prerogative with any member who serves on the commission other than the city councilor and staff.
Okay, Bob.
Well, I guess I'm somewhat along the same lines. I'm just interested. I think this is very good, and I support it with just this one question about the quorum, because theoretically, the two student members could both be over age 18. And then therefore would, under this would be voting members. That would put the number of voting members at 11 So a quorum of 5 and a voting membership of 11 seems a little unusual. So I wonder, was that intentional, or is that, what's the thinking behind that?
I was trying to keep it so that the size of the quorum wouldn't go too high. We are fortunate right now that we're going to be full up, but there were times in the very recent past where that was not true. And up to now, we have not counted the optional members as part of our quorum computation.
Right.
And so I felt that it gave the commission more flexibility if we specifically stated what the quorum count would be, rather than leaving it to the norm of basically half, over half.
Over half.
I like the 5.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you, Ray.
I like the 5.
Okay.
Because of the issues that you discussed earlier. And I think 5 is still a reasonable number to get a consensus on something. I mean, it's only if the other commissioners aren't showing up, right?
Well, it's only if they don't show up for that one meeting. I
Yes.
wonder if there's a way to say it's a minimum of, it's 1 over half, but a minimum of 5. Then that way, if you actually had 11 sitting members, you would have to have 6 people there to be a quorum.
Yeah,
wouldn't have-
that's
you wouldn't-
exactly
you
what I was
wouldn't-
trying to avoid.
Yeah.
Well, right, but it is a bizarre thing to have a quorum be less than half of a voting membership. That
Yes, it-
does feel bizarre, but we're really looking at the difference between 5 and 6.
It's also unusual to have optional members. I went through all the other establishment clauses for the other commissions, and nobody else has this.
Yeah.
So I was just trying to keep it simple of what count we have to have in order to conduct business.
Right. We may not always have optional members here.
What does it mean to be an optional member? I guess that was the question I had seen, that the memo says that the last open position is in the process of being filled. And I was thinking, if I were a prospective student member, reading these materials and thinking about joining, I would look at this and say, oh, I'm not valued, or I'm not needed here.
Okay, I will accept that criticism. I didn't spend a whole lot of time composing. This is what it really boils down to.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean it as criticism. I meant more, what was the intent when the commission was formed? What is there, like, an actual definition of optional member? Or what's the difference between just an open seat and an optional member?
I don't know. I did not participate in the process of writing the establishment clause. Gary?
Sorry, Rick, but my preference is to anybody on the commission gets to vote, and it takes a majority to hold a quorum. I mean, that's the way most commissions, most committees, et cetera, work. And I kind of feel like that's sticking with the tradition's the best approach.
Okay.
If you can't muster a quorum, then sorry, that's just the way it works. The city council doesn't conduct business with less than a majority of its members for the same reason.
Okay. What do you want me to do?
Rick, I wonder if this might be helpful. One of the things that is problematic with some of the commissions is that the quorums are set based on the total number of potential seats, right? So if you have 7 members on a commission, but the commission could have 9 and the quorum is 5, it means you really have to have, 2/3 of the people there in order to have a meeting. And that's where it becomes problematic. And I think that's where we've seen some potential problems, is when we were low on people, is, do we end up where we can't actually have our meetings? And so I don't know. I think maybe it's worth us circling back with the city attorney, Rick, and just answering the question about, is it a state law that says that under 18-year-old person cannot vote? Right? Get that question answered. see from this group if the person could be allowed to vote, do we want to, to include them as a voting member? Kind of seems that I've been seeing some head nodding. And then to find out if it's possible for us to have this ordinance say it's a majority, a simple majority of the number of seated voting members. Are we allowed to have that be our quorum? Which means it could be a different number over the course of the year as we have different numbers of people who are voting members. If they say we can do that, would that solve the problem?
Well, I feel like I've heard enough commentary that your opening part of that statement, which is we should consult the sitting attorney, is the operational part of this. So what I would like to do at this point is to take all the commentary that has happened, I'll condense it down into something that can open a conversation with the city attorney. And when we actually get some time from the city attorney, we'll figure out what our options are and come back with it. Ray?
Are we the only commission that could have members younger than 18?
That's as voting members.
No, first as members, and then you can answer the voting part with the attorney.
Well, I reviewed them all, and I don't remember any other ones that have. Certainly, the concept of optional members, I'm quite certain, or doesn't exist. Anyway, I don't want to pursue this any further tonight.
Okay.
I feel like we've had enough discussion about it that we need to go back and get somebody who can actually make a decision about it to tell us what our options are. Okay, so let's see, we have not quite 15 minutes. I'd like us to spend some time on something that is probably misstated at this point, a selection of topic for January study session. What that really is trying to address is prioritizing the 4 policy recommendations that we've been working upon with the thought that we could then schedule a study session whenever it might occur. Given all the discussion that's already happened tonight, I'm not certain that's actually a fruitful thing to do. That much like we decided at a previous meeting, we should be moving all 4 of them forward as rapidly as bandwidth permits, rather than trying to have a prioritization discussion. Are there any questions or comments about that?
Seems right to me.
Okay, so we'll delay the decision, you're saying. I mean,
Yeah, I just don't think we can have a productive discussion about it right now. We still, as far as I know, we don't have anything that's actually ready to go right now.
true,
Gary?
but it seems like the home energy score is the most developed at this point.
It is, but we had a lot of new input tonight, and Stu wasn't here tonight, so I would not propose that we ask Tanya or the mayor to put this on an agenda for a study session yet. I don't think it's right.
Oh, I would agree with that. We don't know when we're going to be ready yet.
Right. Gary, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think you're right, but I also think we as a commission have to, put pressure on ourselves to make one of these ready and fruitful for discussion with the council as soon as is practical. I would hope that at the January meeting, we can, tick off whatever it needs to be ticked off to move some of them forward. Clearly, that's the only game in town. If we don't get it before the council, nothing's happening other than the home energy or collaboration, which can in fact move forward, which I'm really excited about. I think that's, potentially at least a really productive undertaking.
Well, I certainly agree with that.
One thing I would add into the mix is just with hopefully a new city manager coming on in January, and just looking at the look ahead, it's looking like the beginning study session and meeting in January is going to be taken up with a conversation with the school district and the Parks Commission. And so it is probably unlikely that this commission would get a study session slot in January. But I think it does make it, we want to be looking out ahead so that we can get on that look ahead. So if we think that that February is a time where one of these could come forward, that makes sense to me. I would hesitate to ask for one just for the carbon note or the home energy score piece. It might actually be the municipal buildings one that might be the first one that should come to council, because I don't think the one with the scores needs to come in front of council at any, in the foreseeable future. And I think the other one could come forward at a business meeting. So it's, it might be useful to just kind of decide whether we're aiming at February or March. And then maybe Rick can follow up with the mayor and see about getting that slot just held for February or March.
I'm reluctant to do that right now. My understanding is that the infrastructure procurement one is now pending getting a staff person to come and talk to the commission as a whole. And I don't know when that will happen.
You're not sure when that'll happen. So you're not thinking that that's likely in January?
I would be surprised.
Okay.
But I just have to follow up. Anyway, tonight, I think, is not the time for us to decide when we're going to try to schedule a session. We're unfortunately, and I agree with Gary, we need to ratchet up and start bringing things forward, but I just don't think we're ready. Bob?
Yeah, no, I think the fact that we're very much more specific now with all of these ideas than we were, 4 sessions ago, is ratcheting it up, and we're getting. And I'm wondering whether there's a what's the deadline for actually having that conversation with the mayor in order to try to get a study session slot. And so that was my perspective, that we didn't actually need to have this discussion in this meeting about which one comes first, because the next meeting we're going to have more information. We'll get gotten along a little bit further, and maybe we don't even need to order them just yet. But that's not informed by a sense of, what is the deadline for having that conversation with the mayor about a slot from your perspective, Rick?
Oh, I don't think there is any deadline. I think it's self-imposed and wanting to make progress is all. And so I just think we're not there. And I'm not trying to imply at all that we're not making progress. I think we are making great progress. And I too am particularly happy that we could find a way to move forward that doesn't present council necessarily with a difficult decision. So yeah.
The only thing that I would just add is that those slots do get taken up. They're taken up by topics that come forward from city staff and from other commissions and that sort of thing. And so if we're thinking that it might potentially be March, then we should be asking in January. And we just don't want to get into a situation where this topic has to bump another one in order to get a spot. And so, we should just know there's a lot of big conversations, of course, always coming in front of the council. But the sooner that we have a sense that this commission could hit a study session in a particular month, the soonest we know that is when we should ask for it.
I understand. Gary, did you want to say something?
I do, going back to what Ray alluded to, which is, establishing the monetary threshold for the carbon note. That seems to me to be the only outstanding issue that the commission needs to address. I think we all agree that the council needs to have a structured process to review the impact of their decisions on climate. Is there reason for optimism that during the January meeting, we can resolve that one issue and then be able to move forth for a March or for a February study session, the carbon note?
By mid-January, the study sessions for February will be set. So
Okay.
we'd be looking at March.
Well,
Yeah.
What is
I'm-
possible, it may be possible though to request that study session, a climate policy study session for March, requested in January, with the expectation that we could come forward with the carbon note. We'd have that for sure on the agenda, and the potential that we might be able to also include the city, city purchase procurement element as well as a study session. Study sessions are not decision-making and moments. So I think we probably could talk about both of them in March, even if we didn't have all the I's dotted and T's crossed on the second one. And
I
maybe
would
that's
agree
something to
that we
think about.
should look at procuring a March slot.
Well, what I heard is that we should strive to get these to a point where we're confident of having a presentation ready by March at the January meeting, that we would not make that decision tonight. I'm not hearing objections to that statement. Okay. So now I want to talk about the January meeting just a little bit. We are much of the way through our work year. One of the agenda items that I've been contemplating is to have a mid-year review of how we're doing against the goals that we set last summer. I would put that at the end of the agenda. I think to the extent that any of these policy initiatives consumes time productively, I'd much rather make progress on those. But it's not clear to me that we're going to have a full agenda for the January meeting absent that review. Is there any discussion about that? Gary?
I've been not remiss, but regretting the fact that we haven't addressed emissions from small garden equipment, and wondering if we can explore that topic, given, as you're suggesting, Rick, that there may be some opportunity for more conceptual issues to be discussed.
Yes. Well, I was thinking we'd go through the 5 initiatives and the projects. And one of the reasons that I wanted to do that is that we will have 2 more, I'm expecting 2 more commissioners to be at that next meeting.
Right.
And organizing teams that are going to pursue, to the extent we have more bandwidth, we should be pursuing all of our goals, not just the 4 that we've been pursuing over the last few months. And so that is why I was thinking that we would do that at the January meeting, given time.
I think that is a good idea, Rick, if we have a full council to kind of look at what our work plan is going to be post-January. And if, depending what Tom gets back to us on the electrical plan, we may need somebody working on that too. So.
Right. Okay, so I feel like we've got a number of action items out of this meeting, all of which I expect to help the commission make progress quite a bit. And so unless, and it's going to tick over to 6:30 in any second now. So unless anybody has closing comments, I feel like I've got plenty to do once I review the meeting recording. And I suspect that you all do as well. So are there any closing comments?
Have a good holiday.
Yes.
Yes. Happy holidays.
And to you all.
Let it snow.
Happy
Please.
holidays, everybody. And when Stu watches this recording, Stu, we hope you're feeling better already.
Indeed.
Thank you all.
Good night. all.
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.